Hello, and I'm Pastor Christopher Riley, and welcome to The Future Is Now. Today, we are excited to come to you bringing our first show, and I have with me none other than Bishop Crystal Thomas. Bishop Thomas, please introduce yourself to everyone out there in Facebook
Yeah.
land and YouTube land.
Good morning, world. We're just glad to be a part of what God is doing in this season. I am honored to be on the set today with Pastor Chris. It's our pleasure today to serve you, meet you right where you are. And I believe that today's segment will have some nuggets you can take away with that you can live by, grow by, and be who God has called you to be. So, welcome, sit back, relax, get your coffee, and let's enjoy our time together.
Bishop Crystal,
Yes, sir.
the late great Krista McAuliffe stated, I touch the future, I teach. When did you know that you were destined to be a teacher, that you were called to be a teacher?
Well, Pastor, I've always wanted to be a teacher. There was one other thing I thought about, and that was an airline stewardess, but I didn't see any old ones at that time. So I knew I had to do something that would last the long haul, not knowing that it was totally God directed. But as a young child, I was involved in cadet teaching, even in my student teaching experience. As a high school student, I would go to one of the neighboring elementary schools and I would teach there. But I thought about that even as I was driving today. And I think one thing that really stimulated my ability and the things that God called me to do was the ability to dream.
Mm,
And if I could say one thing as we begin our time together, parents, leaders, give your children, no matter how old they are, the ability to dream. I believe that as we dream about what we can be, we see a picture of what we can be. And so often we don't see ourselves doing it. I saw myself in the classroom. I saw myself with
yes.
children. I saw myself standing in front and giving information. I saw myself in small groups activating children to new levels. So we could get them to dream that with their levels, their questions of curiosity, all the things that they want to do, we can begin to tap into that and at an early age identify. The sooner we find out what children want to be, their giftings and their callings, the sooner we can begin to develop them. I remember my oldest son, every from an infant up, everything was a drum, the
Hmm.
forks, the straws, and now he's the best drummer in the world, of course. But
Yes.
as we identify those strengths in the way people are bent and their leanings and
Hmm.
begin to develop those, but I always wanted to be a teacher. In fact, Pastor Chris, I wanted to be a teacher so badly. I was 20 years old when I had my first classroom. I
Wow.
went right to work. You see, when you know where you want to go, you can go right to it.
That's
So I
it.
went to college. I didn't take any classes I didn't need to take. After all, money was a factor too. So
Yes.
I took just what I needed to take to be a teacher. In 3.5 years, I was out of there and had my own classroom because I knew what I wanted to be. And it was all because my parents, my environment stimulated my dream.
Would you say being the eldest of six helped
Classes hard to
you
practice.
helped
Yes.
you with being a teacher?
I think so. In fact, not only being a teacher, but I look at all of us, myself and my siblings, all of us have service jobs
Yes.
because our parents raised us to be concerned about somebody else. So whether it was teaching, empowering, my brother who's a doctor, I have two other sisters. One is a teacher, one's in ministry. So all of our jobs, as I look at all six of us, they're service jobs. Teaching is a service job. We're
Yes, it
serving the
is.
community. We're serving that next generation. And I believe that because of the way we were raised, I can recall one incident, if you'll just give me a second here. But I remember my dad coming home. He had a whole bag of goodies and all kind of treats. We were not a family of means. In fact, to
Hmm.
keep it real, we grew up poor just like everybody else in our neighborhood. So for my dad to come home with all of these treats, we were excited. We're looking at what he brought. Oh, this is mine. This is mine. We're just being
Hmm.
territorial about candy and snacks that we just didn't get all the time. And my dad said, hold it. Everybody stop. The first thing we're going to do is decide what we're going to give to the neighbors. We said, the neighbors, what about us? So teaching and serving the community was just what our family did. And I think being the oldest of six, of course, there's a lot of pressure to set that example, but all of us could be examples for greatness at different levels because we're all different people.
Absolutely. You know, when you were talking, what dropped in my spirit was bending a child toward
Mm,
his or her destiny.
yes, yes.
And that's something that we do in education.
Mm-hmm.
Your experience primarily has been K through 12, and my experience has been K through 12, but mostly in higher education. And we're still bending students, we're still bending young people toward their destiny.
Yeah. What about you, Pastor? How did you begin your journey? Here we are.
Yes, indeed. Here we are. You know, I didn't always know that education was a part of my path.
Mm.
As a matter of fact, when I was a young man, I wanted to take Brian Gumbel's job on the Today Show. And I really
Ah.
thought that my goal was to finance education,
Mm-hmm.
was to finance education and ministry, not to serve in education and
Mm-hmm.
ministry. But God had another plan.
Mm-hmm.
And when I graduated from college with a bachelor's degree in mass media communications, I received my first job at my alma mater, my undergraduate institution, Wilberforce University. Stepping back a moment, I grew up on the Eastern Shore of Maryland and Delaware. So when I grew up, I always watched the United Negro College Fund and the telethon with Lou Rawls.
Mm-hmm.
And I always wanted to go to a black college at HBCU, so I chose Wilberforce University. It was owned by the AME Church. And then when I went to Wilberforce University, everybody said it's 560 miles away from home. But God was there with me, and
Mm-hmm.
everything that has happened, not to me, but through me, has been
Mm-hmm.
based upon that decision. Even my being in Fort Wayne, which we'll talk about in a moment. But when I landed the first position as assistant director of student activities, I began to fall in love with higher education and education. And in that second semester, I received my first opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to teach a college class called Strategies for College Survival. As a matter of fact, the vice chancellor at that time, or vice president, stated, I need a teacher for strategies. You want to do it? I said, I'll try it. So I went to teach my first college class, and it was so funny, Bishop. The students would say, I thought you were a student. We're waiting on the teacher because I was so young.
Mm-hmm.
And I really felt defeated. And I told my mom, I said, Mom, I said, they don't respect me. They said that I look too young to be the teacher. She said, continue to go back to that classroom and give it your best and continue to teach and be the
Mm-hmm.
best teacher that you possibly can be. And then another thing, one day you're going to walk in the classroom and they're going to stop saying you look too young to be the teacher. And
Mm-hmm.
that day has come. You know, now they hold the door open for me.
Glory to God.
So I guess I've
Amen.
gotten to a point where I've graduated from
Mm-hmm.
looking too young
Yes.
to be the teacher. And but yeah, that was the start of my road in higher education. And then a few years later, God led me to Fort Wayne, Indiana. And here I am 17 years later. So most of my experience has been here in the Summit City. Now,
Mm-hmm.
when you talked about beginning your teaching career, you started in the capital city in Indianapolis.
Yes.
But then God led you to the Summit City. Walk us through that process.
Oh, I will be glad to. I want to say one thing though that really struck my heart about your story
Mhm.
that I think I want our viewers to capture because you didn't, it was something that you didn't plan, but
Mhm.
that's where you ended up. And the times that you second guessed yourself, and how many times have we second guessed ourselves
Right.
or felt like this isn't where we belong, that I don't fit here, that there's no room for me. But there was an encourager in your mom that
Mhm.
spoke to what she saw in you and look at you today. And so I think that's a testimony that I don't want to miss
Right.
because so often doors are shut because of
Mhm.
what's happening inside us, not what's happening outside of us. But somebody was there to kind of push you forward. And we all have those giants in our lives that push us forward and encourage you. So we always have to be encouragers, no matter what our field of study is. And I believe that that's just such an important part of the motivation to keep on going. But I was a teacher for 11 years in Indianapolis, and then I was a principal there for 10. I quit, went to seminary, did some other study, got some other experiences under my belt. And then in 1998, God began to speak to my heart. This really is a testimony about going back to public education. And I said, what? I'm doing all these other things and enjoying life. But of course, being a servant, you just follow. And this was on a Wednesday, and I was driving back from Virginia Beach with my children. And on Sunday, there was an ad in the paper for a principal at Fort Wayne. And so I said, well, let me just apply. And, if, there we go again, if the doubts, there are a lot of ifs in life.
Right.
If I get an interview, then I want to be able to find out the questions so that I can be a better student during the next interview. So I sent my resume on Thursday. They called me Thursday and they asked me to come in Friday, the very next day. So I went in, I interviewed, and I found out not a lot had changed in our profession, even after 5 years. Some things were still pretty constant. But as I was leaving the interview, the lady came and got me, and she said, can you go upstairs? And so I went upstairs. I met some of the personnel upstairs, and they said, can you come back on Monday? Because the superintendent was out of town at the time. And I said, well, I don't know. I have a doctor's appointment and it's already a rescheduled appointment. And my doctor doesn't play with your health. And he wants
Right.
clients that don't play with theirs either. And they said, well, can you use our phone and call? So I called, rescheduled, came back Monday, and here I am.
Wow.
It was truly the act of God. There were some things in Indy that I wanted to put in place. And sometimes, because of what's behind us, we want to make sure that everything is in place. But when God is in it, God has already taken care of what's behind us as He moves us forward into our next. So that's how I got here. And it has been a blessing. I rejoice in my geographical assignment because I believe God has placed us here for such a time as this, just like you, Pastor.
Absolutely. I joke and say that I've been in Fort Wayne for 17 years, had been trying to leave it for 18 years, but I this is where God has called me to be for such a
Yes.
time as this. God has blessed me in this city. God has blessed me to be able to give back to this city in this opportunity and many others.
Mm-hmm.
God has just truly blessed the work, and I'm just grateful to be used as a vessel.
Mm.
You talked about being a principal, and you talked about being in leadership. And many people know you as the pastor and bishop of New Zion Tabernacle. But did you ever question whether or not leadership was for you, or whether or not you were ready to be the principal when you transitioned from the classroom to being a principal?
That's an excellent question. And I want to say, first of all, there is a Bernice in me.
Mm,
And Bernice was my mom.
yes.
And she's gone on to glory now. But she would always tell all of us, don't let anybody tell you what you cannot be. Work hard, do the work, and then watch God work. So as I look at my journey from the classroom to principalship, I remember one particular year toward the end of my teaching career, and there was a position opened from our district for a multicultural consultant. And so my principal encouraged me to apply for it, and I did apply for the job. I got the job, but the job started in December.
Mm,
So the closer it got to December, now I'm teaching in my classroom every day, and the closer it got to December, I'm telling you, my heartstrings were screaming. I was so sad. I said, how can I leave these children? We've already started this journey. Everybody's doing well. The families are engaged. And so the Friday before the Monday that I was supposed to start, I called. I said, I am so sorry. I said, I can't take that job. And people didn't understand at the time how
mhm,
I could say no. But number one, I was enjoying what I was doing. I loved being a teacher and I loved my students. And even as a principal, I always said, because at that time I was not a mom,
mhm,
but I always said, I want to treat every child as if they were my own. Because when I do have children, I want to be able to reap the kindness, the grace, and the mercy that I show in the lives of these children. So we went through that year, and then the following year, there were several principals that retired. There were different principals that left their position, which opened up about 3 slots in Indianapolis. And I had done all of my graduate work, most of it anyway, at Butler University. In fact, I had like 60 hours almost beyond my first master's. But there was one class, my principal encouraged me to apply. He
Yes.
said, Crystal, I really think you should do this. That's why I said, I thank God for the wizards and the geniuses
Yes.
that He puts around us to encourage us and push us and sees things in us that we don't even see in ourselves
Right.
because we're so busy doing the work. We're kind of like the grassroots level, but people are watching us. And no matter what you're doing, always do your best because somebody's watching. So I'm kind of doing my thing, and I said there was one class I needed that I didn't have for my certification, my administrative certification. The Lord spoke to my heart and told me go back to Butler and ask this one teacher to teach you because he teaches it over the summer. So I went to him. He said, just get those books, write these papers. And so God opened a door now for me to have the certification. And let me tell you, there's a whole story. I won't go into that now, but there was a whole story behind even that favor that God showed me
Right.
up on my life even then. So I applied, and there were 45 applicants for 3 positions. When I went to the interview, I'm so glad I mean, they didn't give me water like they gave me today. So I sat down and I started coughing. I said, oh gosh, what is this? This is not a good impression. So they offered me water. I drank the water, and then they began to ask me questions. And it was like God was just taking over. It was
Mhm.
almost like an out of body experience. I
Yes.
listened to myself respond to some of those questions. I said, whoa, this
Mhm.
is not me at all.
Right.
So I felt God just taking over. And there was not one question they asked me where I did not have experience because I served my pastor. I served my principal. I served my leaders. And let me tell you, if you want to be great in this life, service is
Mhm.
the way. Service is
Yes.
the way. So to the point that they asked me, they said, one question, if you had all this experience, so if you did all this, what did your principal do? So talk about quick thinking. I said he was busy duplicating himself, making principles for the life of this organization. So they offered me the job. And when I walked in to my first assignment, that building was erected the same year I was born.
Wow.
So I said, "Oh my goodness, Lord, the same time that I'm being birthed, God's erecting this. That at this point, at this moment, at this Kairos moment, God brings the two together." So it was really all God all the way, directing my path. And because I've leaned on Him even then, it makes me more committed to lean on Him now.
When you were talking and you talked about God putting the wizards and those who encourage us in our paths, I thought about all those who encourage me to pursue leadership. Currently, I'm the director of academic advising at Ivy Tech Community College, Fort Wayne, Warsaw. And when that position became available, several people asked me, were you going to apply? I said, no, absolutely not. And then
Mm-hmm.
God began to speak to me. And before I knew it, I had submitted the application, went through the
Mm-hmm.
interview experience. And much like you shared, it was like an out of body experience interviewing and meeting with the
Mm-hmm.
staff. And I was familiar with the staff because I was already a part of the administration there.
Mm-hmm.
But there was also people who had a negative response to my taking the position. Um, but when I accepted the role and when I began the work, God's favor began to
Mm-hmm.
shine. God's favor began to flow,
Mm-hmm.
to flow. And it was really one of the best decisions that I had ever made.
Yes.
And I think about going into ministry. We're both bivocational pastors.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I had no idea that pastoral ministry was a part of my journey. As a matter of fact, when I accepted the
Mm.
call to
Thank
preaching
you,
ministry,
Lord.
which is another story for a different day,
Mm.
after many years of running, I said, well, I'm going to be a staff assistant. I'm going to speak at revivals. I'm going to write books. I'm
Mm,
going um, to do other things. But pastoring wasn't one of them.
mm,
But then God said, go and do the work. Go
yes.
and lead the people. You're
Mm,
ready. I've equipped the one that I have called.
yes.
And in that process, I would say, but God, what about this? What about that? And eventually he just told me, Bishop, stay out of my business.
Mm.
And I find he has to
Ah,
tell us that from time to
yes.
time
Yes.
is that
Yes.
if I brought you to it, I've
Mm-hmm.
got a plan to take you through it.
Mm. Praise God.
And I think about that statement encouraging
Mm.
our parents out there.
Yes.
No matter what you may be dealing with, no matter what you may be going through, no matter the struggles you may be having with your children have a gifting. It's our responsibility as parents, as educators, to help bend your children toward their destiny. And that's what we endeavor to do with The Future Is Now.
Mm.
We will have guests.
Yes.
We will we will delve into some topics. We will talk about some issues that are plaguing our community. But not only will we talk about issues, but we'll talk about solutions as well.
Absolutely. Yes. Hmm. One of the things I think about for our families out there, and education does so many things. And when I think about education, I don't want us to look at or get a vision of just a classroom because classrooms are everywhere. They're at home, they're in our kitchen, they're in our living room,
Mhm.
they're in our car. Classrooms are everywhere. And the more we talk to our children, the more we engage them in things outside of them, in the environment, in social issues, in the whole justice movement, it breeds a security. I think that we have parents that are still trying to grow up themselves,
Mm.
and sometimes we misstep, and when we misstep, we miss a process. We have to go back and we have to do something else to kind of close in that gap for the process. But if we could make our children and even ourselves as adults feel secure, for securing God, securing our skill sets, there is just no limit to what we can do, and not just now, but for the future. We need to make sure that we're affirming each other, and the affirmation that you give another colleague can be an affirmation that you can receive yourself. So, that whole mindset of encouragement and positive thinking and not giving up. When you were sharing your story, Pastor Chris, I thought about all those steps, but you never gave up.
Right.
And the only way that we give up, remember when you give up on you.
That's
The
it.
dream is still there. The,
Hmm.
the, the vision is still there. The possibility in you is still there. So when you give up, you say, I'm not worth it, but you're worth it. That I can't do it, but you can do it. You just need the right teacher like us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm,
Oftentimes I've said we throw in the towel, but
yes.
God throws it back to us.
Yes, yes, yes.
Speaking of throwing in the towel, sometimes we get frustrated with our children, and particularly our children who may have special needs or may have a different way of learning that's
Yeah, thank
different
you, Lord.
from our learning style. Encourage the
Mm,
parents out there in the 2 minutes that we have left
mm-hmm.
about how you, as a master teacher, as an educator with a lot of different experiences, how you had to encourage and bend your own children toward their
Mm-hmm.
destiny.
Well, I've had a lot of children in my day,
Hmm.
not just my two and then all my grandchildren. But I think it's very, very important to be adaptable.
Yes.
Two words I want to say: observe and listen. Sometimes we get so busy with our own life and what we're doing or what we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to accomplish, whether it's cooking dinner or driving in the car or trying to meet a certain deadline. And then the little one or the big one comes to us and they've got an issue. So if we observe and just take time to listen, I think about my 3-year-old grandson, whom I have with me often. And we were at the pool the other day, and this is language that we talk about at home.
Yes.
He wanted to go in the deep part. He can't swim. He's only 3. He's got his floaties on, and he was getting frustrated. And so I said to him, I said, "Are you getting frustrated So, what I wanted him to do was identify his feeling. Even at a young age, if we can identify the feeling and then we make a decision, will this feeling override my purpose, what I'm trying to accomplish?
Mm,
When I look at my role as principal or pastor, the number one thing I think God's called me to do is just to develop people where they are.
right.
And we have to listen and observe. And if we could slow our roll, calm our clock to be able to tune into their clock, I think therein now is a connection made where we can both grow and be successful.
Absolutely. This has been great. But like all
Wonderful. Yes.
things, it
Yes.
has to come to an end till
Mm-hmm.
next time.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely continue to tune in to The Future is Now. An investment in today's youth is a profitable gain tomorrow. Education is the key to success, for the future belong to those who prepare for it today. Bishop Crystal, say goodbye to the people and then give us any parting words of wisdom.
The thing that keeps resonating is don't give up. I don't care how old you are, 50, 60, 10, or 11. Don't give up. Don't give up on your future. Don't give up on your goals because the future is now in you, just waiting to be developed.